Electricity is expensive, and not just in terms of the dollars that you spend for it, but also the cost of the additional carbon that goes into the atmosphere from producing it. Veckta is a company that helps large commercial property owners develop on-site energy. They say that by creating energy on-site, it can cut down on cost and also on pollution. I want to know how this works and what it means for owners of retail, mixed use, and other commercial real estate projects. So I have some questions for Dan Roberts, co-founder of Veckta. Live from Las Vegas, it's Where We Buy. That's right, you're listening to Where We Buy. It's the show where we talk with retail experts and we visit the places where we buy. My name is James Cook. I research retail and real estate for JLL. So we're recording live at the JLL booth at ICSC 2025 in Las Vegas. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, James. Excited to be on with you.
All right, Dan, I want to just get right into it. Veckta, we're at a cocktail party. You're talking to somebody who's not in the industry. How do you explain what Veckta does?
Veckta is a software platform and a team of experts that support companies with large real estate portfolios to assess and build on-site energy systems. So folks use our software platform to figure out where amongst their portfolio are high-value sites, typically from an economic perspective. At those high-value sites, what is the optimal system to build across solar, batteries, backup generators? When we are working with manufacturers, we look at other technologies like fuel cells or cogen, but in the retail space, it's typically solar and battery energy storage. And then when there's a strong business case that they want to go pursue and build that system, we have a marketplace of capital, construction, and equipment providers that we run a competitive procurement process to get them the right long-term partner. So really, when you distill it down, we help companies figure out where to build, what to build, and who to build it with.
Interesting. With a focus on on-site energy generation and storage.
Correct. Yeah. So within the energy space, there's kind of three major buckets. You've got residential, you've got commercial, industrial, and then you've got utility scale projects. We focus on the commercial and industrial sector.
Okay. So let's say I own a large portfolio of properties. Is my first step like just importing that list of properties into the database and then you run some magic on it? Is that how it works?
You nailed it, actually.
Okay.
So one of the things that we found in the industry is access to some of the necessary data to run these analytics can be challenging to get a hold of. So, for example, utility bills, consumption, interval data, what's called interval data. So how much electricity is consumed every 15 minutes for an entire year. This is data that's available, but you actually have to work with the local teams to pull that information. So to get a first pass, rather than, let's say you have a portfolio of 300 properties, it'd be pretty crazy for me to come to you and say, can you go get me 12 months of utility bills across 300 properties? You'd probably say, no, that's a big undertaking. And so with just as little as an address, a facility size, and a facility type, so whether it's a retail center, whether it's a cold storage facility, whether it's a hospital, we're able to then take that information, pair that with a bunch of our own internal market-related data, a bunch of external APIs on the tariffs in that area, how much it costs, the solar irradiance, total cost to deploy these systems in the different regions. And we run an optimization to determine what is the optimal on-site solar and battery energy storage system and all of the key financial metrics associated with that. So then you can distill down a portfolio of 300 sites and say, these are my top 5 or top 10 sites that then I'll go and collect some additional data on and refine those results a bit further.
Okay, so we're going to imagine for a moment that I own a portfolio of 300 shopping centers, right? Because that's my world is retail real estate.
Yep.
So we identified what you called high value sites. So let's say we narrow it down to 5. And this is like at first pass, these could be the good ones. Now, what do I do? What's the work I have to do to bring it to the next step?
Yeah, so we have some very easy tools. Oftentimes, companies have utility bill management platforms that have some of this data residing in it, and we can extract that data and import it into our platform. Other ways we have where we can actually pull that directly from the utility and ingest that into our platform. The two key data points are how much do you pay and what is the structure of what's called your tariff with your utility. And that is a combination of energy charges, which is the total volume of electricity consumed, and demand charges. Now, in energy charges, there could also be time of use, where you're charged different rates at different times of the day. So, for example, peak times in California, where I live, is 4 to 9 p.m., where you're paying the most for power during those times. So we break all that down, and then we understand what your demand charges are, like the highest amount of electricity that you've consumed within a billing period, and the charges associated with that. Then we'll also pull what's called interval data. I mentioned that a moment ago. Every 15, 30, or 60-minute increments for an entire year. So that gives us an understanding of how you consume electricity throughout a day, throughout a week, a month, and all the way through a year, so you get some of the seasonality. And with those two data points, what you pay and the structure of what you pay and your consumption, we then pair that with all of the incentives and other characteristics of the site constraints. So can we use the roof? Should we be looking at the parking lot? Is there a plot of land next to it where we can do some ground mount? These are all considerations to come into what is the optimal system for this particular site. And again, we're always optimizing around economics. We do, in very rare cases, have companies come to us and say, what is the optimal system to reduce as much carbon emissions out of the project? Or we're concerned about outages. Grocery stores in particular, this comes up, where we're concerned about outages and we need to be able to ride through a 2, a 4, a 12-hour outage. What type of system should we do? And that's where we start to pull in not just batteries, but also looking at backup generators.
Once we've identified my high-value sites and then we've dug in and gotten some more detail, so you said that for retail centers, it's going to be either battery or solar.
Most often.
Why is that?
Well, the costs of these technologies have come down very substantially over the last 10 years. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind when thinking about these. These are truly technologies. So similar to the semiconductor industry, the costs of developing these technologies has come down, and therefore it makes it more economical to deploy these systems. The other factor that's at play here is energy rates have skyrocketed over the last several years. So my team did an analysis where we looked across the US from 2016 to 2020, commercial rates went up 2% across that 4-year time span. Then fast forward 2020 to 2024, commercial rates have gone up 23% over that time period. And that's on average across the US. There's outliers, again, like California, where 2020 to 2024, it's actually gone up 72%. So 15%, just under 15% annually.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's where those economics of deploying these systems, I mean, you're basically making an investment in deploying a system that's going to last 25 years. And you can do it on balance sheet and you can finance that yourself. But oftentimes companies don't want to do that, especially in the real estate space. Any of their capital that they have, they're looking to build or acquire a new center. There's financiers that want to come in and they want to own these systems and just simply sell power. So that's where you can get what's called a power purchase agreement. So you may be paying on average 20 cents a kilowatt hour to your utility for the power that you consume from the grid, where you can go get power purchase agreement. I mean, we just supported a customer to go get an 8.5 cent per kilowatt hour power purchase agreement. It's depending on the system size. That's for a larger system, you're likely going to be somewhere in the 10 to 15 cent per kilowatt hour range. So substantially less than what you're paying to the utility.
And just so I understand, is that like a third party builds something on my site and then sells me electricity at this agreed upon lower rate?
Correct.
I see. Yeah. Interesting.
And oftentimes those contracts will have some sort of annual escalator, somewhere in the 1% to 3% range. But we've also supported customers, and it's kind of depends on the attractiveness of the company that's hosting this, where we get a 0% escalator. And as you can imagine, if rates have been going up 5, 6, 15% year on year, your delta of what you would be paying to the utility versus what you're paying for this on-site energy starts to become greater and greater, and it just creates a much more attractive long-term cash flow proposition when you think about the net present value of a system.
What is, and how long is what's the lifetime of one of these systems?
Yeah, great question. Solar, you can the equipment warranties that you're going to get, or excuse me, the equipment warranties are about 10 years. The performance warranties are 25 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so and that's pretty standard. You were starting to see some reaching up into the 30-year range at this point. On the battery side of things, you can typically expect a battery to have a useful life of somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 years. And so when we're modeling these systems, we look at a 25-year horizon, and if batteries are included in the analysis, we'll also account for at year 12 an entire battery replacement, so that you're getting to be able to use that battery through the life, but we're not overlooking the degradation of the battery that happens over time.
Gotcha. So you talked about there's a way to do it economically where there's a purchase agreement. Are there other ways that it can also be structured?
Yeah. So especially within the retail space, I find that a lot of them, the large asset owners, they are for decades, they have leased space, right?
Yes.
They've leased the space within the four walls, if you will. And now there's an opportunity for them to lease the rooftop. So now they've got a whole new monetization opportunity, drive up their net operating income. And so in certain locations, it's more attractive to be able to do this, where they can lease the roof to a solar developer that then it's up to that solar developer to monetize the solar system that they're building. This is most common in states where there is community solar legislation. So this is where someone could build a system, typically 1 megawatt or larger. So you need a pretty sizable roof, 120,000 square feet of usable space or more. And they can lease the roof. The developer comes in, builds the system, and then finds folks within that community, that general area, other businesses or residents, to become off-takers of that. And that's how that developer monetizes that asset. And so this works in a variety of states, and we support customers to look at that model. Another model outside of a power purchase agreement, if you're not doing a CapEx project, is there's plenty of folks that if you want to do an on-balance sheet project, but you don't want to put forth all of your own capital, that will debt finance these projects or look at lease structures where you'll still be able to have it on balance sheet and have an opportunity to own that in the future.
So there's a lot of different ways you can do this for it to make economic sense. Your company, so I understand it, you said it's a software platform, but it sounds like you end up being more like consultants too at the end of the day once you narrow it down.
So we've simplified the user interface to be able to do this on your own, but what we find is that most often our clients want to have their hands held through this process. And as you start to get a couple reps under your belt, they get a lot better. The one piece that we haven't touched on yet is all of the analytics is great and all, but then when we find a great project that someone wants to pursue, the market is extremely fragmented. There's thousands of installers and developers of these projects. And so what we've also built is a marketplace of these installers and developers and engineering, procurement, construction firms who will run a competitive procurement process. And we typically aim for somewhere between 4 to 6 bids per project. On more attractive projects, we see those getting up into the 9 to 10 bids. As you start to get beyond 6, it becomes a bit unwieldy to navigate through. But we pay very close attention to developing a clear, comprehensive request for proposal up front so that we're getting apples to apples bids from the developers. And so we want to be clear on what's the commercial model that we're looking at. What's the system composition that we're looking for? What are some of our expectations around contracting? Especially companies that have done this a couple times, they've got contracting terms that are must-haves, and they've got contracting terms that are can't-haves. And so we like to get that up front and then communicate that to the suppliers that are bidding on these projects so that they can look at it and say, absolutely, we can fit within those, or you know what? Those are no fly for us. We're not even going to bid on this particular project. But because the market is so fragmented, it helps them cut through the noise. Everybody's getting reached out to on a weekly, daily basis from someone trying to sell them their solution. And we can act as their independent advisor to say, this is what you should build. These are the right parties to build it with. And we'll support you in getting bids, evaluating those bids, negotiating those, and ultimately awarding that work.
Oh, I have like 2 questions at once here. Okay, my first question is, there's a lot of suppliers out there, I would imagine. Is it tough? Do you have to vet those who are going to come on your platform? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a pretty defined qualification criteria where it's based on years they've been in business, projects they've deployed, experience. So when you look at, there's some that are what are called like smaller commercial developers or installers that specialize in, call it 50 kilowatt to 500 kilowatt projects. And there's others that won't get out of bed for something below a megawatt. And so it's really important to understand, okay, based on the location, because there's regional players that are often great at this. There's a handful of national players, but oftentimes the regional players can be better value. So the location, the technology composition of what you're deploying and the size of that system, along with the commercial model, dictates who are the right parties to go and get bids from.
And so how do you make money? Is it them paying to be on your platform? Is it a percent? Like, tell me about that.
Great question. So for companies that have large real estate portfolios, there's typically an annual subscription or platform access fee to access all the analytics and our team and the professional services associated with that. And then the back half of our business model is when we support someone to get a new partner to deploy one of these systems. We support the supplier to get a new customer. The winning supplier pays Veckta a success fee when they win work. And so just like any other marketplace that you can think of, when a transaction occurs, Veckta gets paid a success fee.
Makes sense. Okay. I want to, maybe we'll move a little bit beyond retail, because on this idea of on-site generation, I want to hear more about what the other options might be out there. So we talked about solar, talked about batteries. Tell me, what is geothermal? Is that an option, or is that really not? No, that's not generation.
It is generation,
okay.
but it's kind of unique and is cited. There's a lot of growth in the geothermal area, but more on larger scale projects. I'd say the most common technologies that we see, of course, we've talked about solar and storage. Growing is the need for EV charging infrastructure. Now that's not generation or storage. That's a load center, but it is oftentimes very much impacting the consumption profile of a particular facility. In the manufacturing space, depending on what they manufacture, we can look at, say, fuel cells. So fuel cells can generate electricity and they have byproducts from that process that can be used in industrial processes.
Wait, what's a fuel cell?
So a fuel cell will typically they can be hybrid fuel sources. So they can either take in natural gas or they can take in hydrogen.
Okay.
And produce electricity. They also have water that comes out as a byproduct. And depending on what you're putting in on the front side, you could have, if you're putting in natural gas, you could have hydrogen coming off the backside as well. Now, it only really plays when you have a need for hydrogen or have a need for CO2 coming out that backside. We also see natural gas or diesel generators often being part of the mix for backup instances. And then the other one in kind of larger installations, especially when there's large heating loads needed, is something called combined heat and power or cogeneration, where you burn natural gas, you produce heat, but you also that is used in industrial processes, but you also produce electricity in that process as well.
And do you think all of these on-site options are most sophisticated owners and companies and manufacturers and, whatever, commercial property owners, are most of them aware of this stuff, or is it just kind of hazy and they're like, boy, I need to get real on this, but they don't know a lot about it?
Yeah, there's a gradient with most things. There are some that have been doing this for many years and have a pretty well-oiled machine to do it. Target is a great example. Some of the top deployers would be Target, Walmart, Prologis, Lineage Logistics. These are companies that have done this at scale, have hundreds of installations. And there's other companies that they've heard of it and they're aware that it exists. I think there's some preconceived notions that, solar is expensive or batteries are expensive. And I think that paradigm is shifting, especially with the rise in grid costs that I was speaking about before. And so because of the increasing electricity rates and the increasing operating costs associated with them, the conversation around energy has been elevating over time into the C-suite, into the boardroom, to start to look at what are the options to curb these rising costs. And one of the things that most people, it's kind of a bit of a paradox, say, well, isn't the cost of producing electricity coming down? And that is the case. The cost to produce an electron is coming down. The thing that's rising and outpacing that decrease in producing electrons is the cost to deliver the power. So the transmission and distribution infrastructure is what's increasing grid costs. Well, one way to not have to deal with the transmission and distribution infrastructure is to produce and store power right where it's used, at the facility. And so that's where more and more folks are looking at this at on-site energy solutions.
So I've heard the term microgrid. Is that what it means when you're producing your own electricity? You've got your own little mini electric grid?
So there's, I would say, microgrids are a subset of on-site energy.
Okay.
The definition of a microgrid is a distributed set of loads, so things that are consuming electricity with distributed energy assets, solar, batteries, could be backup generators, and the ability to island from the grid. So it's still connected to the main grid, but the ability to island and disconnect from the grid. And this can happen in times of power outages where you still need to maintain operations. We have a client in San Diego, a biotech company that is a dermatopathology lab. They process skin samples, typically cancerous biopsies, and they process these skin samples, and they cannot have the power go out when they're processing, because the last thing someone wants to do is have to have their dermatologist call them and say, I'm sorry, you have to come back in and we have to take another sample. And so they've deployed on-site solar and battery energy storage in a microgrid, and you have a microgrid controller. It's a smart hardware and software device that monitors and is able to switch over from the grid and operate on its own. There is another, you mentioned the word mini, there's also another term called mini grids, and these are completely standalone grids, typically in remote locations that are not connected to the broader grid.
So I just learned something. So the microgrid is connected, but it can be disconnected and operate autonomously if it needs to. I imagine when it's connected, can you sell excess electricity onto the macro grid?
Yeah. So there's I would say the thing that you can do is you can optimize your interaction with the grid. And what I mean by that, especially when we think about time of use rates, so different times at different times of day, or different prices at different times of day for power, and demand charges. There are things that you can do that are called load shifting. So if you overproduce some solar in the middle of the day, you store it in a battery on site, and then you discharge that battery and consume the power in that battery in the evening so that you're not consuming when it's most expensive. That's called load shifting. And then there's peak shaving, because demand charges is based on the spikes in power that you use, where you can use a battery to smooth that out and not have as high demand charges. So you're optimizing the way you interact with the grid. There are other situations where you might be overproducing and you either don't have batteries, or your batteries are all full at that point, where you are putting power back onto the grid. And certain locations are more lucrative for doing that than others. This is called net metering or a feed-in tariff. The rules in California have been changing over time. Folks were grandfathered into previous structures, so it's not as lucrative to discharge energy into the grid, for example, in the middle of the day. In the summer, there are times in the evening where you can get paid a lot, which is when the grid needs that power. There's other locations that have great net metering or feed-in tariffs. Austin Energy, for example, you can get paid over 11 cents per kilowatt hour to discharge in the grid. So it's really a location specific. And I think that one of the things I'd want your listeners to take away is when you're looking across a vast, geographically diverse portfolio, 300 assets, you might have 300 assets across 250 different utilities. And each of those utilities are going to have different tariff structures. And each of those sites are going to have different consumption profiles based on the climate in that area. And so and there's going to be different incentives that are impacting these projects. And so that's the power of having a platform to cut through all that, understand all that, track the dynamic nature of this market to see how the business cases for these projects are changing over time.
So is this everybody who owns, say, shopping centers or retail real estate should look into this, or is it really a subset of people that should investigate this?
I think depends on the location. There are certainly estates or utility territories in the country where the power is so low, it doesn't make economic sense. And we're the first to tell our clients, hey, don't focus here. Washington's a great example. Washington State has very cheap and very clean power. So whether you're trying to be sustainable or just be economical, it's actually great because they have so much hydro. California, on the other hand, or Hawaii, has extremely expensive power. And so there's great business cases. And so that's part of what we help companies do, is determine where should you focus, and then the whole process of actually developing those projects. But really, anybody that is experiencing rising energy costs should be looking into this. And I think we'll look, 10, 15 years from now, we'll look back at this time as really the inflection point in the industry. There's only 3% of commercial and industrial properties have on-site solar at this point. So there's a huge opportunity to deploy these systems. And I would just, there's most of the people here at the show and anytime you're taking a flight, if you're sitting on a window seat, look down and see all the empty roofs. And those are opportunities to create mini power plants, produce electricity, and it's just an incredible opportunity. I'm an energy nerd, and so I stare out the windows and just look at opportunity. And I think I would encourage all the asset owners out there to think about that the same way.
So you're an energy nerd. Is that what led you to co-found Veckta?
Yeah, so I studied energy in school. I've spent my life in enterprise software companies across a variety of industries. I kind of got pulled out of the energy space and spent time in highly regulated spaces like healthcare software and digital identity and fraud prevention software. And I felt a really pull once I had gone through an acquisition of a previous company I was a part of to come back into the energy space. And that's where I ultimately connected with my business partner who had conceived of the idea a couple of years prior and had been incubating the idea. And the two of us, along with our other two co-founders who lead product and operations for the business, really were pursuing this opportunity because really it's the commercial industrial businesses. It's hard for them. They don't know where they should focus. They don't know who they should turn to. There's so much noise and fragmentation in the market that we try to bring some cohesion and confidence to them actually developing these systems.
So you're out here at ICSC, which is just filled with owners of shopping centers and real estate. Is your goal awareness? You're trying to just spread the word and let them know it's an option and
that's
get
part
them
of
on
it.
board? That's
part of it. I think awareness that there's a more streamlined way to do it is certainly one bit. There's some where awareness of what the financial opportunity is. Because again, I've met people on Sunday, went back to my hotel room, dropped a bunch of their properties into the platform, and when I ran into them on Monday, showed them, hey, were you aware that you have 30 sites that have a sub 5-year payback for deploying these systems? And so there's a lot of education in this space.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you will flag them by like how long the payback
Absolutely.
takes?
Yeah, we'll produce a full 25-year cash flow. Here's the payback. Here's the net present value, the IRR for deploying these systems.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And something else you're doing to promote awareness is you're a fellow podcaster. What's the name of your show?
Our show is called Renewable Rides. We started it, we're going on almost 2 years now. And a big part of it was exactly that. It was education. It was helping people understand, what others are doing in the industry. So we have interview folks from the industry that are either building these systems, that have deployed many of these systems, that are supporting folks deploying these systems. And then we also do internal episodes where we talk about particular topics like the changing in tax credit landscape or what's going on from an outage perspective. We just saw some pretty crazy outages over the last couple months across Spain. Basically, the entire country of Spain had a prolonged 12-hour outage. The entire 97% of the populace of Chile just went through a big power outage. So we talk about these topics because they're actually not too far from home when we look at the aging U.S. grid infrastructure. So that's a big part of what we do. And yeah, it's nice to be on other podcasts as well. And thank you.
What's the name again? So
Renewable Rides.
Renewable Rides.
Find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube.
All those places. Yep. Well, you mentioned something, the aging grid. As an energy nerd, does that scare you? Is it in disrepair in the U.S.?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily in disrepair. It can be prepared. It's just that the kind of need to upgrade it has been kind of a thing that's been kicked down the road, and that bill is coming due now. So I'll give you one kind of chilling fact.
Oh, no.
Large grid transformers. So these are pieces of equipment that step up and step down voltage. They reside at substations, and it's to go from the transmission grid to the distribution grid. And the expected life of these large grid transformers is about 25 years. The average age of large grid transformers across the U.S. is 40 years old.
Oh, no.
So that presents some
That's
challenges.
Not good.
Yeah, so that presents some challenges. And that goes back to the reason that grid costs are rising is because transmission and distribution, the costs associated with grid hardening, making the grid stronger, allowing it to move more power, because as we electrify transportation, electrify heating and cooling, the data center revolution is driving a much higher growth in demand, and therefore we need to move more power. It's just going to require upgrades to the transmission and distribution infrastructure.
Wow, that's fascinating. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. This has been such a cool conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, James.
Awesome. Thank you. If you want to hear more interviews, audio retail tours, and new research insights, you can subscribe to Where We Buy on the iPhone podcast app, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Just search for Where We Buy. And you can also find us on the web at wherewebuy.show. Our theme music is Run in the Night by The Good Lauds under Creative Commons license. Awesome, that's a wrap.